Welcome, friends. Really lovely to see you all. We're just getting everybody in from the waiting room, so this always just takes a couple of minutes. Perhaps, Hannah, you could let me know when you think we've got everybody in. Welcome to this evening. It's really good to see you. If you'd like to pop who you are and where you're zooming in from in the chat, that would be really lovely, just to know a little bit about each other. We have got everyone muted on the call just to try and navigate the Zoom room in a helpful way. Hi, Ian, lovely to see you. And Steve, we're just going to wait another moment, friends, just another minute or so, make sure we've got everyone in, and then we can make a start. Hi, Nikki from Hampton Bridge, and Natalie, and Neil in Birmingham, not far from me, just round the corner, in fact. Lovely to see you. Welcome, everyone. If you want to put where you're zooming in from into the chat, that would be great. Welcome, Ian and Fiona, and June and Nita. Great to have you with us. Just to say, we've got you all muted, just so to prevent the background Zoom noise. And we'll just wait until we've got as many people in from everyone in from the waiting room before we start. Please do whatever's helpful to you. If you want to turn your camera off, that's fine. If you want to leave your camera on, it is being live streamed, but you won't be shown on the live stream. Okay, friends, we're going to make a start. So I'd like to offer you a very warm, I've said it, haven't I? Welcome to the evening. My name is Eunice Atwood, and I'm the Church at the Margins officer with the Methodist Church. I'm part of the evangelism and growth team, and I'm a friend, very much a friend of JPIT, but I'm also passionate about people experiencing poverty. And I must admit, I could never have imagined that when I got this job 2 years ago, just how bad things would get. So I feel like we're gathering on this call, friends, because we share that concern, a concern for people experiencing poverty, a concern about the crisis that is clearly emerging, the relentless news that is coming. Even every day this week, it's been changing, hasn't it? And we've heard of yet higher energy bills. So we're here to share a conversation, to share together what we're noticing, what we're seeing, but also something about the hope and how we might respond, and how we as Christians and faith communities together might act. So we're going to spend our time this evening just to give you an overview of the evening. We're first of all going to listen to Paul Morrison. He's the one of JPIT team, and he's the head of policy, and he has a particular specialism in looking at poverty and economic justice. And he's going to share a brief overview of the report, Is Cost of Living Support Enough? Which you may not have seen. Paul's going to give you an overview of that. And then we're going to have a couple of people, Tracy Hume from Gateshead and Robert, who's going to share local experiences, what they're noticing in local contexts. And then we're going to have Rachel and Anthony. Rachel's going to interview Anthony, and he's going to share first-hand experience of what it has meant for him to live in poverty. And then we're going to think about what we learn, next steps, how we might respond together. We're not saying in any way, friends, that we have answers, but we want to gather that sense of how might we respond in the face of what is emerging. So over now to Paul Morrison. from JPIT, a colleague who I work with frequently, as I said before, head of policy with a particularity around looking into poverty and economic justice. Paul, over to you.
I thank you, Eunice, and thank you for the promotion. I think I'm a policy advisor. I think yes. Head of policy sounds grander, so I'll take that. I'll be very pleased if I could have that. That would be great. I suppose the first thing I should do is actually say thank you to some people who are in this room and some people who aren't. So the work starts with conversations between the church, or representatives of the church, and Gordon Brown and Donald Hirsch at Loughborough University, who authored the final report. And it's also conversations with people who experience poverty, who let us use their stories, and also conversations with local community leaders, some of whom I know are in this room. And that's all come together because we recognized that this was a particular moment where there were particular problems that were facing those who are living on the lowest incomes. So for the churches, this story of this work kind of starts in January. We start to hear from community leaders and from different churches that there's a real problem, that more people are pitching up in difficulties. And when you start looking at it, and we started looking at it, we saw that people were struggling. And largely it was around increases in the price of low-cost foods. And largely it was a build-up of other pressures that they had been experiencing over possibly the pandemic and possibly before that. And we wondered if it was just a temporary effect coming out of lockdown, that maybe it would work its way through. But from January, things start to move very quickly and things start to change very quickly. Prices go up. By April, the headline inflation rate's at 9%, which we haven't seen in 30 years. Even before the big energy price cap rise, energy was increasing had started to become more and more part of people's budgets. And we also saw that the loss of the £20 a week that was given during the lockdown and during the pandemic period was having big effects. So we have this sort of mush of bad things happening to either increase the costs or decrease the incomes of people who are trying to live on the lowest incomes. And government responds. It introduces something called the cost of living payments. Its first response was actually a series of tax cuts, which largely helped the highest off and the highest earners in the country. But then there's the second round of spending, which is these cost of living payments. And so we come to this sort of mush of all these factors, both increasing and decreasing the incomes, increasing the costs of people at the lowest, who are living on the lowest incomes. And the question that this research asked was a really simple one, are the families who are living on the lowest incomes going to be better or worse off next year, taking all of these factors into account? And if so, by how much? And it's really clear. And the report, which I am confident in the chat, there will be, in fact, I'm confident in the chat, the link to it is already there, I just see, because Hannah is more efficient than you could possibly imagine, that it becomes really, really clear that taking all of this into account, people are getting worse off, that they are going to find it harder to make ends meet. But not only that, that one of the way in which the support was given, the cost of living payments were given, meant that those who had the greatest need proportionately got less help. So if you are in a family of 4, you get the same £650 help as if you were in a family of 1. You just have more people to spread it through. if your only income is universal credit because you're unable to work, you get £650. Whereas if you are working and only need universal credit, maybe as a small top up on your rent, you also get £650. So the way in which the money was given was targeted at people who needed benefits, but the amount was just flat rate, and that causes difficulties. So you'll see in the report that essentially it is parents and people with children who lose out more and more and more. And essentially those groups who we might associate with having increased poverty during the last decade are also the groups who are being left behind by this particular delivery method of the money. And I'm going to share screen now because the report was premised on what Ofgem said the price increase next year was likely to be, which was an increase of around, has that worked?
No.
Share screen again. Has that worked?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, that's done very weird things to my screen. So it is premised on the idea that the increase in October would be around £800. So this is where we are at now. And you can see that in April, there's a £600 increase, which increases the price cap to around £2,000 for an average household. And then the report uses Ofgem's estimate that the price cap will rise again by £800. And you will have seen yesterday that the estimate for the price cap increase has changed and changed markedly. So the new estimate is much, much higher, that it will increase by £1,600 in October to an annual price of around £3,600. And then they moved it so that the price cap could be changed every 3 months rather than every 6 months. And so in January, there's expected to be another £650 increase to around £4,200. And so the estimates that are in the report are massively too low now, which we already highlighted there was a problem, but the problem is much higher than the report says now. And that's really important to see. And I have to say that when I was collecting stories for the report, and I was just going through talking to them about their circumstances and what was likely to happen, when I explained the £800 increase, the old level, what we thought the increase would be, I felt positively cruel because people didn't know. They had no answer to how you're going to cope with that. So if they have no answer to how they're going to cope with an £800 increase, they have even less of an answer as to how they're going to cope with a £1,600 followed by a £650 increase. And that is really important. And so I'm just going to finish off by saying the thing that churches said to me first. So when I first went round and talked to different churches and community leaders in January, the first thing they said to me was this has a context. They said to me that this is a decade of cost of living crisis for some people. Some people's cost of living crisis started 5-10 years ago. And that these are communities that are already battered, that already don't know how much money, how they're going to make ends meet. And it's important to recognize we entered the decade with about 13.3 million people classified as experiencing poverty. We ended the decade before the pandemic at 14.6, which is a sizable increase. But the big trend in poverty, and JRF, Joseph Rowntree Foundation, documented it really well in a report last week, was that poverty became deeper and became harder to escape. And so that the people who experienced poverty were having a much harder and more difficult time to cope with. And that has been the trend that's been going on. And so churches wanted to tell me that, talk about the cost of living, this is a crisis, but remember that the people we're talking about have already been through their crisis. So I think I'll hand over back to Eunice. And this isn't really the format to have lots of questions, but if people want to email me, if people want to talk to me, I'm really happy to clarify anything and admit to what mistakes I inevitably made.
That's great. Thank you so much, Paul. And if you want to put questions in the chat, that would be great. And there will be a possibility at the end, towards the end of the evening, we will try and address those questions if we can and if there's time. This evening, friends, is a joint shared online event with JPIT and with Christians Against Poverty UK. So it's a real pleasure now to introduce Robert Larkham. Robert is one of a CAP UK Church Voice. He's a pastor and he's the director of Hope Central, providing a food bank, CAP Debt Centre and a job club. He planted a church, and it's just a pleasure to have you here, Robert. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have Deacon Tracy Hume. Tracy is the Community Engagement Enabler with the Newcastle upon Tyne Methodist District, and she also facilitates the Gateshead Poverty Truth Commission. So we're going to just share a conversation together for the next 10, 15 minutes or so about what they're noticing. So the first question is, what are local churches seeing at the moment? And what are they seeing about the impact already of the cost of living crisis? Robert, do you want to start and then we'll go to Tracy?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, one of the main things we're seeing is a higher degree of anxiety. Because as has already been mentioned, lots of people have been struggling for years, and every change in the cost of living is hitting them really, really hard. Obviously, energy prices having increased at this time of year, in a sense, masks the situation, because we all know that consumption of energy rises dramatically in the autumn and winter. So people are just bracing themselves really, with no idea how they're going to meet those extra costs, particularly later in the year as winter sets in. Yeah,
thank you. And Tracy, what are you noticing in your particular context of Gateshead? What are you seeing in terms of the impact of the cost of living crisis?
So I work in Gateshead. I also work just over the border in Newcastle. I help with a food bank that's literally just over the border as well. So I see in a couple of contexts, I guess, and we're seeing definitely the increase in food bank usage. So that since April, when the first kind of big hit came, we already started to see moving towards a doubling of the number of people accessing the food bank. And that was an increase in people who wouldn't have been accessing it previously. So they're new faces, not just people needing it more, just new faces as well. We run a clothes bar from there as well, and there's an increase in people are trying to use that to get their children's clothes for free, so that they can release some of their funds to be able to buy other things that they need. Those kind of considerations are bigger, and a lot more, like Robert said, a lot of anxiety, but also we're seeing a lot of change in more single people and couples needing to use the food bank because they don't have the safety net of other benefits coming in. Their only income is their universal credit, and if it doesn't stretch, it doesn't stretch, and especially since the £20 uplift was removed.
Thank you. And to you both, what do you think the you've said a few things about the impact on individuals. What do you think that the impact on families and communities might be? And what do you think the constant anxiety that we're hearing about the winter, that lots of people are now saying it won't just be the winter, it will be longer than that. How do you think that will impact on folks?
Should I go first? So I think we're going to see, well, we're already seeing, as I said, an increase in mental health problems, and people they're dreading the winter, and they're already making decisions that are really hard to make. They are already embarrassed that they can't meet the needs of their family. That's only going to increase. I'm very concerned as well about people isolating in this and fearing admitting that they're struggling, even though it's going to be affecting everybody in different ways. There is that shame, and we're already seeing kind of an increase in people crying as they come in because they just do not want to be there. And we know that these problems impact on physical health as well as mental health. So the more that people choose not to turn the heating on, we're going to see their physical health struggling, and people who've got underlying health conditions. So that you kind of just, that has the knock-ons across family. People have more caring responsibilities, that kind of thing, as well as across the community.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you. That's hard to hear, isn't it? All of them impacts. And Robert, what about you? What is the impact on individuals, wider communities, families? What are you noticing?
Yeah, I agree that the stresses on the mental health of people are immense, and the problem with that, as well as the obvious problem of poor mental health, is that it tends to lead people to isolate. Then it tends to lead people to maybe bury their heads in the sand to some extent and just ignore problems. It's always been the case with things like debt, that people tend to wait far too late to address debt problems, because for obvious reasons. They're embarrassed about it. They're fearful of being judged by people that they go to, and so as we see these kind of costs building up, we have to be aware that there is not just those physical problems, but there is very likely almost building up of a sort of dam type situation, where at some point the pressures are backed up so far that the dam is going to burst, and the consequences on people's mental health then, and obviously the increased problem itself, the problems just grown and grown, will make it even more difficult for people to address it, and for people like us to help people address it.
And I think coming off the back of COVID, where people were already struggling with anxiety and mental health problems and being isolated, and we've already seen huge increases in addictive behaviour, and the need for those services, that this is another trauma on top of trauma, and all of the mental health services have been cut to the bone as well. So there isn't that support available. So we're going to see a bit of a tsunami of problems, I think, mental health problems.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's something that I've noticed in and around the communities that I work in, and in my own church. And I don't think we can jump too quickly to hope from that, but I do think that we at some point need to talk about hope, because I do think hope is subversive. Hope is an axe that breaks down doors, is a quote from someone. I wonder, have either of you thoughts about what could make a difference in your communities? What would you like to see? What are the sorts of things that you think, if only we could do this or do that, if we could? Have either of you, and I appreciate this is a tough question, because if you had the answer, you'd be doing it. So, but tentatively, what do you think could make a difference in your communities?
So I think there's something about the coming together of community for community. One of the things that was encouraging to see in the first part of lockdown of COVID was how communities galvanized and came out to support the people who are the most vulnerable in their community, how they could help, how they could support them. I would hope we might see a bit more of that. It's a shame we need to get to that point, but I think it's something that we may see, and I hope we can see more. And actually about community organisations working together, that was another thing that happened in COVID. Instead of working in isolation, people worked together. There was this kind of sense of putting pieces of a jigsaw together. And I think when we work together, when the community comes together, we see something beautiful. It's coming at a tough time. It's not something we want to see, but it's that thing of we see something new and something different. And I already begin to see how people in the community are wanting to find ways that they can help other people. So actually, maybe this is going to be a momentum of things we can do. And we've got things like warm spaces and other things where people can work together. It doesn't have to be one person has an answer, but how we work together. Robert?
Yeah, my hope is that the church will step up to the plate, really. Obviously, people in this room are probably already doing everything they can to support people who are most needy and most vulnerable in our communities. But I think church as a whole needs to wake up to the fact that there are massive needs just round the corner. You know, maybe a lot of the church is very middle class, but they're in every community. I mean, I live in Winslow, for goodness sake, which is, you know, one of the most prosperous towns in the country, probably. But there are still pockets of incredible need. And I do believe that the church is the answer. And I think that is my hope, that because of the intensity of the crisis, that the church will really grab hold of it, and that there'll be a change of heart in a way, that we'll be passionate, we'll be on fire with a desire to be Jesus to those who are in the most need. And I believe that is actually what will transform lives. It will be experiencing the care of believers, just creating community and helping people through giving as much as anything. I dread to mention the tithing word, but I think it's a serious issue that those of us who are relatively well off need to take that seriously and consider, how is the church going to meet needs which the government clearly can't to a large extent, if we as relatively well off members of the church aren't prepared to resource the church. But I do think we are wakening up, and I think that is the hope.
I think as well, we want people to know that they are not alone. And some of the hope is, some of what we can offer is knowing that they are not alone. There are people who can come alongside them. We can't solve their problem. And also that we may be galvanized as a church to react to some of the pressure that we need to place on government and others. But this is a call to justice. And maybe it's the kick up the backside that the church needs sometimes to actually galvanize themselves. Lovely.
Tracy, Robert, thank you both so much for sharing from your communities, and thank you for all the work that you're doing in those communities. And a lot of what you said has reminded me of the foreword in the report from Gordon Brown, where he talks about the importance of faith communities, charities coming together, responding to immediate need, but also that anger that I felt from you both, that frustration that knocks on the door of the government and says, come on now, what are we doing? So thank you so much, both of you, for sharing that. Much appreciated. Thank you. Friends, now we're going to move to hear from a section. We've entitled this First-Hand Lived Experience, and I want to introduce to you Rachel Gregory. Rachel is from Christians Against Poverty, and she is the Senior External Affairs Manager at CAP UK. She manages the Relationship Management and Policy sections at Christians Against Poverty, the strategic oversight of the charity's social policy. Rachel, that's a mouthful. That sounds like you have a lot to do every day. And we're really delighted to have Anthony here. Anthony says I can describe him how I like. He's a father of two, and he's someone with first-hand lived experience, and he wants to share with us a conversation about that experience. So Rachel and Anthony, over to you to have that conversation together.
Great. Thank you, Eunice. Good evening, everyone. We're really grateful that Anthony has come to share some of his experiences with us. I first met Anthony about a year ago, when we had the opportunity to go and speak to the Work and Pension Select Committee as part of one of their inquiries. And Anthony is someone who we've supported at Christians Against Poverty through our service, and through that, being able to build links and opportunity for Anthony has really become a powerful advocate for people living in poverty in the UK, which you are going to get a glimpse of today. So we're really grateful that he's joined us. Anthony, will you just introduce yourself and give people a bit of background to sort of where you find yourself now? What's the backstory?
Okay, yeah, sure. I am Anthony Lyman. I am a father of two, and I have mental health disability. I went bankrupt in 2019 with the assistance of CAP and the guidance, and since then I have been trying to recover, however haven't been given a very good opportunity to do so.
Thank you, Anthony. And yeah, so with the cost of living rising in the last few months, will you give us a bit of flavour of what that has meant for you? What sort of pressures has that brought to you as you've been trying to recover your finances?
Well, I'm solely reliant upon universal credit as my only source of income. I also get a low amount because my children don't quite count, even though I have 50-50 access. So we are living off, in essence, a single person's allowance, and trying to make that stretch between 3 hungry people and a lot more energy usage than that allows us to do. Currently waiting on PIP appeals to come through for my disability, which I've been waiting over 6 months for now. So we're feeling the pinch really tight as a household, to the point where my debts are accruing again, resulting in me possibly having to get in touch with our Northampton CAP Centre again as a client rather than an advocate.
And I think it's really disheartening for you to be reliving some of what you went through before. And I know, it is particularly just the basics, those household bills that it's just so difficult to pay at the moment, and this is summer. I think many people in this call will know some of what will have had experiences of poverty perhaps themselves and know some of what that feels like. But for those that don't, will you tell us a little bit about what does it feel like to be in the situation you are in now? How does that impact you and your family?
Well, first of all, I'll share with you my experience before I got involved with CAP full stop. So I was trying to make the books balance the best I could. I was working really hard in trying not to bury my head in the sand, as they all put it. And it just wasn't working. There was no options for me to take. I was very lost. Then my mum, who sponsors CAP, guided me into the loving embrace that is offered, and the guidance and wisdom towards trying to find a solution. Unfortunately, because I tried everything else, there was no other solution for me to go bankrupt, but there are other training things available. So I then have to recover for 3 to 5 years on average after going bankrupt, in order to get back to what's known as a normal state of finance. And that's just been absolutely impossible. What should have been a recovery period, we found ourselves in a deficit of up to £250 a month. And that is since things were introduced to try and help us recover. We're finding that's hitting our family really hard, because there isn't a magic money pot anywhere. And the reality of it is, where do we go from here? Mental health wise, I've had many a night with questionable situations and thoughts going on when the kids are in bed and stuff like that. Is when you have time for things to speak. So I want to encourage anybody who is in a similar situation to please ask for a bit of help. Don't be embarrassed, because we're all going through it together. I just want to throw that out quickly.
Yeah, that's a really important message for people to be hearing, and it is amazing and powerful how open and honest you are about sharing what that was like at the moment for you, Anthony. And obviously we're talking about here today as well, we're in summer in the middle of another heat wave, but we're looking ahead to the winter and know that that is causing already a lot of anxiety for people. And as shared in the report, there have been payments put in place. You've had some first instalments for some of those payments, but can you tell us a little bit about what some of your concerns are for the winter period? How do those payments stack up to you, and what are you left with?
Okay, yeah, so that's, again, it's kind of like putting a band-aid that's too small over a wound. It's never going to actually close it. There's going to be some seepage, excuse the visual for there. But guys, the situation here that I am faced with in my household is when they made the offers of the payments, whether that was the uplift that was introduced and then taken away, or whether it's the recent payments that they're put on, they don't seem to consider the reality of things, that the cost of living is rising significantly alongside these payments. So they're putting that temporary plaster on, but I'm really concerned because when these lump sums are given along to households, they're not always used in the correct manners. They're not always, people are not always aware of the right budgeting strategies and things like that. So that money gets eaten up very quickly, whether that's arrears or whether that's thinking you've got a bit of extra cash that you actually haven't. So where is the permanent support, the long-term support that's going to help us have, I suppose, the stability that we need to offer for our children and our households? There isn't, is there, at the moment, sadly?
And sort of finally, Anthony, off the back of that, what's your main message tonight for people on the call and wider, the people that we've got the influence to speak to? What's your message of what needs to happen this winter to support people like this?
Well, I think it's really important for people to discuss real living case studies, people who are actually going through it. And I think it's so important to sit down and give the support and love to get to know these people, to find the reality that they're being faced with. Because you could approach me in the street, and Florence, away a minute, please. You could approach me in the street, sorry, a 5-year-old daughter, and you could say, "You're right," and I'll go, "I'm all right, mate." But then when I get home, I'm not really all right. So it is okay not to be okay, first of all. Second of all, it's important for us guys that are in place to offer that support, keeping non-judgment and letting people understand that that is completely there. It doesn't matter who you are and where you're from. And then finally, I think for the people who need to make the changes, I think it's really important for them to face the reality that we are not statistics. There is no number that will fix this. The reality is there needs to be the right tools put into the right place, invested in to help us move forwards. Otherwise, we got a horrible, horrible time ahead of us.
Thank you, Anthony. I think that's exceptionally well put, and it gets to the heart of it, speaking about real people around the country, millions of people that are going to be facing really tough time. So thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing.
Pleasure.
I'm really grateful. And I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you so much, Anthony. That I feel like you've really summed everything up. So thank you so much. That was just brilliant. Now, friends, we're going to move to our final panel, where I'm going to invite Rachel Gregory from Christians Against Poverty UK, Paul Morrison from JPIT, not the head of policy, but the policy advisor. We've just I promoted him, now we've demoted him again. And
don't take it away.
sorry. And PJ from the Poverty Truth Network. Just to introduce PJ, this is the first time we've met you. PJ is a trustee from the Poverty Truth Network and describes himself as having had crises in the past, but also a person who was plays bass and writes poetry. And thank you so much. And friends, I'm going to ask the panel some questions about what they think. But if you want to put what you think in the chat as well, we'd be really like to hear from you. So the first question, in thinking about next steps and how we might respond to this crisis together. And so my first question is, what are some of the ways to provide support to the people who need it most? PJ, I'm going to let you answer that first, if you don't mind. And if people in the chat want to think about what do they think is the response to that question, please do, because we'd love to see your responses. So what are some of the ways to provide support to the people who need it most? PJ, what would you say?
I think the first thing that's come out tonight from the different messages I've been hearing is, first of all, there's a lack of understanding at the top of the scope of the difficulties, the breadth of all of the places where people are struggling with money. One of the things that I think we need to do is to capture that data better, so that when the government, which has basically picked the baddest apple in the room and has tried to address that, as Paul said earlier, it does not address clothing issues, food issues, the transport issues, all the things that have gone up. Where I live in Plymouth, people have mentioned to me that they used to pay £5 for going places on buses. Now it's £9. That's a lot of money if you're traveling to work or going for shopping or anything like that. So I think we first of all need to gather more data so that more understanding of the problem. The second thing, from my perspective, everything I've learned is that money doesn't solve everything. And what I mean by that is that because of mental health conditions, because of substance problems, because of low education, there needs to be more assistance around advocacy and good approaches to things and thinking through problems, not making bad decisions. As was said by the previous speaker, about thinking you're okay when in actual fact you've forgotten about a bill which will put you into a dire strait if you don't pay it. And I think that is one of the things that I would think, because otherwise people will end up in the arms of local sharks, and that only adds another layer of woe to people's lives.
Thank you, PJ. Thank you so much. And I really hear that passion for advocacy, and that people experiencing poverty are the experts. We who are not, and and that's come across really strongly in the conversation. And thank you for highlighting that. Rachel, then I'll go to Paul. Rachel, how would you respond? How do we provide support to the people who need it most?
I think that there are, on the ground, like we've heard from Robert and Tracy, there's so many amazing examples of churches proactively supporting people, bringing together lots of different types of support alongside each other, to be that wraparound care, to be that non-judgmental, compassionate place that people can come and find that safety and support. I don't think we should underestimate how powerful that is, and that there is, the demand for that sort of support outstrips what we currently have. I think there is a role for us as a church to be that active network on the ground, our reach into local communities, the depth of care we bring. At the same time, I think as the conversation we're having here today, we're not underestimating the scale and depth of challenge people are facing, and how the structural barriers that we're hitting up against in those frontline services, that means we can't see the transformation we want to see in people's circumstances. I think, as Paul rightly said, this is a situation that begun before this year in Debt Advice, which is what our main service at Christians Against Poverty. We have something called deficit budgets, which have been growing over the last 5 to 10 years, where when we do all of the sums, put all the pieces together, people simply don't have enough income to cover the very basic expenditures. We've cut everything to the bone and there's still not enough. And at the moment now, across our sector, about 4 in 10 of the people who are coming to us for debt help are in that situation, and we're really limited on what we can do to truly get people back to financial well-being in that situation. And the challenge we have here is, as Anthony rightly pointed out, we're seeing temporary short-term lump sums, but there are lots of policies still within, particularly within social security, which means the support people receive in cash terms is not linked to the cost they face or their circumstances. I think there's a role for reinstating a higher universal credit payment as a base, but there's also other elements within the system that impact how much people get for their housing costs or for how many children that they have to support in the household, which decouples it from the needs people have, and some quite quick changes that could be made to support people this winter.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. You remind me of a quote from Gordon Brown, who said that the social security system is no longer secure. And it hasn't been secure for a long time, but there is no security. What was meant to provide security for people and enable them not to fall below a certain level, that's well and truly gone. And I think, I hear that in the call of the report that's offered to us, that enough to live, not just, that sense of thriving, not just surviving, but life. Paul, how would you respond to the question? What are some of the ways to provide support to people who most need it?
I was going through the numbers that came out yesterday, and I've got a bank of budgets from real people, and I plugged in the increase in energy costs. And these are people who needed help from food banks or from debt centres and things like that. And not one of them, when you applied the increase in energy costs, not one of them worked anymore. And that's extraordinary. Previously, 60% worked when you put in the £800. And I think the first thing we need to do, and we need to impress upon government, and it was the key ask of the report, is to say that this is an emergency. This is when something needs to happen, and needs to happen quickly. This isn't a time for equivocation on finding the perfect scheme. This is a time to get money to the people who need it, or there will be real serious consequences for those families and those communities. And the easiest, quickest, most effective method of doing that is to bump up universal credit, because it is targeted at the poorest families in the country. There's some problems with some people being on older benefit styles and that taking a bit longer, but even then, that would seem to be the way forward. After the emergency, you used to be a nurse, Eunice, so you know that when people arrive in A&E, the first thing you do is you patch them up, and then you look at what a good life would look like, and how to rehabilitate them to that point. And the rehabilitation process is going to take a while. So universal credit was designed really badly. The social security system and how it's set was designed really badly, and we need people with lived experience like Anthony and PJ to be in the rooms redesigning those. But deal with the emergency, and then let's have a vision for a society which people who have lived experience of poverty are genuinely valued. That's how I deal with it, and I'm sure that'll work.
Thank you. There's quite a lot of conversation in the chat about the government, so I want to move to that government question, which is kind of, we can take it any way we want, but I can see in the chat, just to the side of me, a lot of people saying, will they do anything about it? We're clear about the ask in the report. The question I have for you is, why do we need the government to take action, and how can we help that to happen? So why do we need it? What action do we want? The messaging is clear in the report: urgent action to respond to the immediate need. But what are the ways that folks on the call might do that? PJ, do you want to have a go at that one? There's quite a lot of skepticism in the chat about understandably, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I think is to remember that Parliament is made up of those people, it's not a single body, it's actually made up of all of the areas of the country. And we all have an MP. The thing is to get them, is to get yourself in front of them and put across your local issues, and even to the extent of maybe inviting them to an evening where they're in a room of people who are experiencing it, so that they get the sense of the magnitude of their own issue. And if every MP had us giving them that information and putting the pressure on them, then they'll start to, well, it comes down to democracy. You know, we can say, well, if you want to be in charge, then you better make some changes. We want to see you talking to the guy in charge and making it change.
Yeah, thank you. And Rachel, what do you think? What would you like to see?
I think there's encouragement for all of us in the action the government has taken so far. You know, at this point in time, it looks minute, but when we were back in April, when the second package was announced and where the forecasts were at then, it was a much bigger package than I think any of us probably expected at that point in time. And I think that there's encouragement for us in the lobby, and the voices that were out ahead of that announcement did make a difference. We weren't guaranteed to get that package. You know, a few months before, we got something much, much smaller that wasn't targeted at people on low incomes, and we saw the dial moved. And that's what we need to happen again, because the circumstances have changed. I think also the more we can do to highlight our concern about this being a long-term issue, the impact this has on poverty long-term, inequality long-term, that this isn't just a problem we care about because it's now affecting all of us. You know, none of us want to pay £4,000 or more for our energy in a year, but actually our deep concern that as a society, we've left people vulnerable to this at the sharpest end, because we didn't prioritise building a society that didn't have poverty, didn't have significant inequalities across geography and across income levels. And I think PJ, you know, makes a really powerful case of how to do that with your elected representation. And we know that conversations are happening within civil service, preparing options. We're sort of in this hiatus at the moment, but you know, there is hope. There is still time ahead of October, ahead of January, that we can still see policies introduced. And I think the more, it's not just our MPs or our government hearing from people that experience poverty, who are struggling, but for them to know how much voters care about this as an issue, you know, to have feel like they have the mandate to spend the money and to put cash injection into more support for households. The more we can do to show, you know, the number of us that care about this and want to see action, the more change we will see.
Thank you. And Paul, do you want to add anything to that? There's a question quite appropriately that's just popped in. What is the planned next steps with Gordon Brown? I think of all the people on the call, you might know that.
No? I'll answer the first question and probably tactfully skate around the second. The first question is, and I just want to reinforce what Rachel said, that the government didn't really want to give out the package that it did. The second one, it was kind of against the way that it thinks and the way that it understands the world and it understands the economy. So it gave out this fairly awful spring statement that was based on tax cuts and distributed money towards the richer half of the population. And people went bananas at them. They really went mad at them because people who understood what the effect of that would be saw that there was real problems. And actually, there was a bit of confusion. There was this sort of running round going, but I thought I did good, but I thought I did good, before there was an attempt to have a conversation in which you get a targeted response. So it's not that government is unresponsive. It's that sometimes its instincts aren't pointed in the right direction. And one of the things that we can do by facilitating, I saw in the chat, Caroline has introduced her MP to people who use the CAP Debt Centre. It is by having those conversations that slowly but surely people's instincts will change. It is by meeting people and having a relationship with them that their instincts will change. And if that's a job of work, but showing that you're annoyed and showing you care is a good first step, and that's quite quick, and it's worth doing.
Yeah, thank you. I have a final question to you all, and then I would like to invite anyone on the call to pop a question into the chat. If you could just put Q for question, because some people are making statements and telling us things, and that's fabulous. But if you've got a question, and if it is to somebody particularly on the panel, if it's to PJ or Rachel or Paul, please just say. If you want to ask Hannah permission to unmute so you can ask your question verbally, feel free. But if you'd rather just pop it in the chat, that's fine as well. The final question is, where do you see hope in the coming months? And this kind of pulls together a lot of the things that you've been saying, but where for you is the hope for your communities? PJ, I'd like to come back to you. Where do you see the hope?
Well, I think there is a realization broader through civic and business leaders and things like the efforts we made in Gateshead Poverty Truth Commission, for people to realize that they can actually do something, that they perhaps didn't think, oh, I'm outside this, there's not much I can do, but in actual fact, it's almost, we need everyone to stand shoulder to shoulder. And like as people have said before, when we had the lockdown spirit, we kind of need to get an economic spirit of, we don't like the way things are working. You're just putting plasters in place to try and stick over things. Why have the prices gone up the way they have? Why is it that all you're doing is raising the cap? Why didn't the cap stay at 800? Why was it not left there? And if that's because well, that's the law, then or that's what we've agreed, then we need to change the agreement. It's not a good agreement. It's not a clever way of doing things. And we are very good when it suits us to changing things and getting new things done. But the economy, if you like, is one of those where it's like the government only. And actually, in fact, the 67 million of us, and I think we had a say in how it works.
Thank you, PJ. Thank you. Rachel, how would you respond to that question?
I think Tracy put it really powerfully earlier. There is such hope in the witness that the church will be in this season, for the compassion and the non-judgment that people will experience, and that our nation will see that as Christians, we're committed to caring for people and making a difference, and we extend ourselves to do that. I have hope in that. I have hope, what we're talking about tonight, their forecast. We know it's going to be bad, but I have hope that some of the heat will come off it. It's perhaps not as bad as we fear. And I have hope as well that through this, there are lessons for our society that break some of the stigma around poverty, that we learn that poverty is about running out of options, and it's out of people's control, and we lose some of that stigma and blame that often comes attached with it, and that is a foundation we can build from to try and tackle poverty longer term as well.
Thank you so much. And Paul, where do you see the hope?
Maybe I can impart some hope. I am utterly sure that the government will produce a package that supports people, that there will be more money coming. What we're fighting for now is how it comes and how it's targeted, and whether people with lived experience actually have some say in that. That would be the idea. But in the sort of longer term, I see a lot of hope in the fact that, as PJ is saying, the economy seems to have been the shibboleth that we cannot touch it, we cannot think about it, it's something for the experts over there. And suddenly, as it touches all of our lives in a more sort of jagged way, we might actually start asking questions about what is important, and what is important in our communities, and what is important in our society. And we might be able to have that really big conversation about what is it, how is it we want to live as a nation. Mm. And that will come at the end of all of this. That will come, and I feel real hope that we could come to a better compromise than we came to over the last decade. That by the end of this decade, we might have rethought that. Yeah. And hopefully we can do that together, and Christian churches can be part of that conversation.
Thank you so much. Friends, panel, I want to turn now to some of the questions in the chat and just see if we can get some of them. And I'll read the question, and then whoever would like to chip in, unless I think occasionally the question is targeted at a particular person. There's a question, a very practical question. Is there a template for a letter church leaders could use to appeal to our MPs, referencing some of the points made tonight? Anyone have an answer to that? I guess there could be.
As long as you wrap it in a brick.
Thank you, PJ.
Just like to say, the Methodist Church officially dissociates itself from that comment. Although maybe handing you masonry.
Yeah.
I think there's quite a lot of resources out there at the moment, different right to MP actions. We have one at CAP that's open at the moment that is focused on cost of living, making some more specific points around needing a pause in deductions taken from people's benefits for government debt collection, which people can find on our website, and the link that's going to be circulated afterwards to find out more. There will be more coming over summer and into autumn, and so I keep an eye out, and there definitely will be more resources for that. I don't know, Paul, whether you're aware of anything else that's worth.
I think the question I tactfully skated around about what the next steps with the work with Gordon Brown and with the really large coalition of organisations that's come behind the report. I think part of that will be facilitating church leaders to contact their local leaders and to contact the government to talk about to highlight what we've been seeing and to highlight possibly what's happening in their own area. So we're having some roundtables with different people to work that out with the organizations to make sure that we move together. And so that will be forthcoming in the next few weeks.
That's great. Thank you. PJ, there's a question for you. Do you think Poverty Truth Commissions is the way forward for local authority relationships?
Well, I can only go with the one I've been involved in for 3 years, and the outcome is yes. As long as they are wholeheartedly open to co-production between the two, between taking citizen information, if you like, the lived experience, and making it to change and formulate new policy, and also to adapt the way they deliver their services for different elements of the community. If they are, which Gates said have done, then it's quite amazing. Yeah. I am still amazed at how much actionable things have happened. Like leaving carpets when there's a transfer of tenancy for council properties. For when they did the warm spaces work recently, they used community voices. They used people for what is that going to look like for you and your neighbours? How that. So I think that it's all about the council itself. If you like, looking at the philosophy that we're offering and really saying we are absolutely going to follow this roadmap. And I have found it amazing. And I just point out as well that our commission was actually financed by Methodist Church. So people who have been saying about Methodist churches doing things, well, there are ways. You can be part of a commission, and you can also facilitate or fight. You know, there are all ways you get involved.
Can I just add to that and say, I went to Poverty Truth Commission in 2015 when I was doing a report on benefit sanctions, and I'm a scientist by training. I love my graphs and I love my numbers. And then I met with a group of commissioners, and it utterly changed my life, or certainly changed the way I did my work. They are transformative, because when you hear the stories, it makes so much difference, and it makes so much difference to how you read the numbers and read the reports and everything else. So there are lots of other ways of if it may be a truth commission doesn't suit where you are, whoever asked that, but they're fantastic where they suit. And there are lots of other ways of getting lived experience. It is lived experience. It is relationship and story that changes the world, not graphs. And it pains me to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. My mantra: nurture relationships, not events, not programs, not initiatives, nurture relationships. Friends, we're not going to have time to get through all the questions. I've just seen how many there are in the chat. So forgive me, I'm just going to have to pick a few. I can see there's lots that are kind of come into themes around changing the culture of how people view people experiencing poverty. There's an interesting question from Sally Rush. Where can we learn the economics to talk back to the politicians in their own language and offer alternative solutions? Anybody want to go at that?
All right, I'll just briefly, my view is, and one of the things I've learned in talking to the DWP at senior level, is they love to talk nationally, national statistics. You know, there's 1.5 million jobs around. The thing to do is to make sure that your economic profile of your area is actually put forward. You know, Gateshead is a highly deprived area. It has high unemployment. 60% of its residents live on benefits or topped up with benefits. So this thing that they want to, the way they want to rule the conversation is completely in the face of how I want to have the conversation about the area I'm talking about. And I think that's one of the things we've got to do. You know, England isn't just like one body. It's dozens, hundreds of different demographics, economic profiles all over the place. And we need to start getting more sophisticated instead of just banging on about the national statistics.
Thank you. That's really helpful, PJ. Anybody want to add to that?
I think often when making the case for things, we have to recognise that the economics and money is one of the big motivators, and often you can offer a fresh perspective in showing how your ideas will save money, or in perhaps other areas that aren't anticipated. So, you know, showing there's lots of, you know, if you look online around sort of social returns on investment, those sorts of concepts can be really helpful to show, like, while it might cost £1 to do this, if we reduce mental health and that saves money on the NHS, that helps people get into employment and generates tax revenues. You know, sort of expanding the thinking on sort of what can be quite linear economic arguments can often be really powerful.
Thank you. There's another question from Richard. Who will fund food banks with the increase in demand that will happen? This is an interesting thing, isn't it? Are we going to see a drop in food bank donations because the impact of the cost of living, because people are going to face such huge energy bills? I don't know if anybody has noticed that already, or what people are seeing.
From what we're seeing is that donations are down, both in food donations, cash donations, and as you would expect, they tend to be in areas with most need.
Yeah.
So within the Trussell Trust network, there's quite a lot of redistribution goes along and grant giving, but one hopes during the pandemic, the government was quite keen to fund food banks as an emergency solution. And certainly Trussell Trust and quite a lot, and Independent Food Aid Network, which is the other big sort of grouping, resisted that strongly because food banks should not be part of the welfare state. The government's responsibility is to fund a social protection net, and then food banks should be underneath that for the very few people who, for whatever reason, fall through. So one hopes it won't be the government that funds it, and one hopes that food banks are able to resist what will probably be offers of money. But it does mean, back to talking about tithing and things like that, that people who can afford to give to charity may need to think about whether or not they should.
Thank you. Thank you. There's an interesting question from Andrew. Are there positive examples of hope in other countries that we could push our government into? So somebody commented earlier, didn't they, about the French? I saw a comment about France and how it. Does anybody have this? This might be a bit left field. Anyone have any awareness of that?
French energy prices are capped at a 4% rise per year, but it means that the French government is pumping very large amounts of money into the energy providers,
right?
Which sounds good,
yeah.
But because richer people use more energy, it's fundamentally it becomes a subsidy. It targets money higher up the income spectrum than something such as benefits might do. Yeah. So there are other things that can be done, and there are other countries that are managing it, but lots of them have better energy markets which have got less focus on short-term gain and more focus on long-term stability. And I think that's the lesson we should learn coming out of this, which is we'll pay a few pounds more on our bill if we know that it's not going to rocket through the roof next year.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Friends, thank you so much. I'm conscious of the time. We've stretched the webinar to finish at 8:15, and we want to honour that time. I want to say a huge thank you to Rachel, PJ and Paul for this section, and to everyone else who's been involved in this evening. I've found it really, really stimulating and really has got me to think. We will be contacting you all afterwards, so we'll send links to Christians Against Poverty and we'll send links to JPIT things. There's some information from Hannah there in the chat, direct links to the web pages. And if you have any questions, do feel free to email them to folks. So a huge thank you to you all for being here and participating in this conversation, even through the chat function. And this is something we really need to carry on, isn't it? This report on Sunday, I was delighted to see it. And we really need to think as Christians together, what does it mean to really, for Christians to act as Christians would be a good summary, because the Bible is very clear, it seems to me, that poverty contradicts the will of God, and that to abandon people experiencing poverty is to abandon the gospel. So we simply cannot do this. So a huge thank you to you all. And I'd just like to close, if I may, with a word of prayer. And then we'll say good night to you. Let's just pray together, friends. Holy, life-giving God, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for passionate people who care about people experiencing poverty. Thank you for those on this call who have shared directly their experience of poverty. Holy God, we pray that you would continue to disrupt us, to motivate us, to inspire us to listen to people with first-hand experience and to amplify their voices. Holy God, forgive us for the world that we have created, for the way in which so many people are now this evening worried. Holy God, stir up your church. Call each one of us to continue to be the people you long for us to be. We ask this in the name of the disruptive person of Jesus. Amen.